Off the plane, he's back from the NFL Combine. We have Matt Schneidman from The Athletic here to talk about the Packers, specifically what GM Brian Gutekunst had to say on Tuesday. Let's get straight to it, Matt. Last time you were here, you said the Packers and Jaire Alexander appeared to be headed towards a divorce. NFL Network's Ian Rappaport tweets out today that the Packers have had trade talks with him. Can they get anything for him, or how do you think this situation kind of plays out?
It's possible. You know, I believe I said last time I was here that they have to try and trade him, but teams probably know that they're going to cut him anyway. So is the team going to want to give up draft capital to get a guy that they could just sign for no draft capital on the free agent market? But the downside to that is they'd have to compete with other teams, whereas if you give up a pick, you don't really have to compete with other teams on the open market. It does appear, though, as if the two sides are going to split ways after 7 seasons. Brian Gutekunst's first ever draft pick as Packers general manager. At one point, a lock for the Packers Hall of Fame. I don't know if he is anymore just because of the injuries the last couple seasons, but it certainly looks like the Packers are going to have to find some depth or even another starter at outside cornerback.
It's a real bummer because when he's healthy, he's an all-pro type of player. But outside of Alexander, what intrigued you the most from Gutekunst's presser on Tuesday morning?
Yeah, it was more of a lighthearted comment, and I don't know if we should take it super seriously, but we were talking about edge rushers on the market and the narrative that fans have created online that the Packers won't trade their first-round pick because the draft is in Green Bay because they want to get more people to come to the draft. Brian Gutekunst laughed and said Mark Murphy actually joked with him recently that he got the green light to trade the first-round pick. And then I asked Brian Gutekunst, so what you're saying is you're not going to trade that pick for an edge rusher? Because Brian Gutekunst had just finished talking about how he wants more picks. They only have 7. He said, well, it depends what edge rusher. So people can speculate for the next 7 weeks or whatever it is until the draft is. I think that's the biggest thing I'll be watching, along with what they eventually do with Alexander, is do the Packers make a splash move at edge rusher with one of these guys that is rumored to be on the trade market.
What do you think is most likely to happen in free agency or a trade with that first-round pick? Is it an edge rusher? You've said before you think they'll go through the draft with a wide receiver to acquire a wide receiver. Do you think they make a splash through free agency or a trade? What's the biggest one? Would it be defensive end or cornerback?
I think cornerback, just because the free agent class at cornerback is stronger than the class at defensive end. You could have, Khalil Mack, Josh Sweat, who had 2.5 sacks in the Super Bowl for the Eagles. Those are kind of the cream of the crop in the free agent market. At cornerback, though, Byron Murphy, who's a Pro Bowler for the Vikings, Travarius Ward for the 49ers, one of the better corners in the league, Carlton Davis from the Lions. If they make a splash, and they have the money to, Goody's talked about how they are in the best cap situation in the last 2 or 3 years, corner could be a spot to do it at.
One thing I found kind of interesting, and fans probably see it a different way, is Quay Walker. He kind of turned it on for a couple of games last year, and then he gets injured. But Matt LaFleur talked about on your last podcast with him, or your last radio show, how high he's a guy he leans on in the locker room. Goody's very high on him. What do the Packers see in Quay that maybe fans aren't seeing?
Well, it's Quay and Keisean Nixon. I think the gap between fan perception and inside Lambeau Field perception is a gap far too wide for people to understand. I think they just really like what whoever likes him likes, is his speed, his horizontal speed, his ability to get downhill, his ability in coverage. He's been inconsistent over his first 3 years, but when he's healthy, he can be a really solid complement to Edgerrin Cooper. The trick with him is they have to decide whether they want to exercise his 5th-year option or not, which would guarantee his 5th-year salary in 2026 at $16.5 million. That's far too expensive. So I would anticipate, and Goody kind of alluded to this, them trying to work out an extension this offseason in lieu of the 5th-year option. And then Keisean Nixon, just because I mentioned him, Goody really likes what he did at outside cornerback last year in his first year playing that position. He was a nickel beforehand. So Keisean Nixon referred to himself as CB1, and without Jaire Alexander, assuming that's the route we end up at, Keisean Nixon could very well be the number 1 cornerback.
You got to like that your cornerback has that type of
They have to be a little delusional.
Yeah, you
and both those guys, Jaire and Keisean, a little delusional.
And speaking of first-round picks on defense, when the Packers drafted Lucas Van Ness in 2023 in the first round, I caught up with Phil Parker, his defensive coordinator at Iowa. He said, selfishly, he told me 2 things. He wants him to come back to play well on his defense, but also that he needs to refine his game. Yesterday, Gutekunst kind of said he expects him to make a huge jump this year. Do you see that happening, or do you see that kind of just talking up his player maybe for the trade market or something like that?
No, I don't think it's for the trade market, but I need to see it to believe it with Lucas Van Ness. He's a guy that hasn't broken out yet, hasn't tapped into that potential that he has. The athletic freak who didn't start a game in college, but he had the tools that the Packers like. Last time I talked to Matt LaFleur, he said we really need to tap into that potential because there's a lot there. They fired their defensive line coach, Jason Rebrovich, who was at the sports bar I was at last night. And Lucas Van Ness is probably one of the bigger X factors for the team this year because we wouldn't be having this talk about going out and needing to get an edge rusher if guys like Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness played up to their potential. But remember, Rashawn Gary didn't really break out until year 3 because he was behind the Smiths. Maybe year 3 is the magic elixir for Lucas Van Ness as well. Packers sure have to hope it is.
Is it a matter of when, not if, the Packers sign kicker Brandon McManus? I'm sure a lot of Packers fans are holding their breath after watching Anders Carlson for so long and then see McManus.
And Braden Narvison.
Yeah, and Braden Narvison lock down that position McManus has.
Yeah, Goody said yesterday that they're working toward that. I fully expect them to. He made 21 out of 23 field goals, all 31 extra points. So they finally found some stability with a veteran, and that's a position where you can afford to have a 33, 34-year-old there and not worry about, okay, is he almost over the hill? Like, kickers can play until they're late 30s. That's young for a kicker, exactly, even though he's the Packers' oldest player. But yes, I think they will bring Brandon McManus back.
Any big takeaways you want to touch on that Goody said yesterday?
No, we covered it all. I did talk to Joe Barry for about 20 minutes. I saw him in Indianapolis. He's doing well.
Was he riding a bike around Indianapolis?
No, he wasn't. He had a beverage in hand. I won't say what the beverage was, but he's living down in Fort Lauderdale and enjoying life.
Awesome, Matt. Thank you so much for your time. Fresh off the plane, Matt Schneidman from The Athletic. I'm John Miller, NBC 26 Sports.